welcome again to another episode of Blam Truckers. I'm Buse,
I'm Bees.
and we are here to talk to you about all things geek in a hopefully positive format. Unlike last episode, where we kind of briefly went off talking about more real life, regular stuff, but that's okay, because we're just here to talk, have fun, exchange ideas, and for me, drink coffee. Um, but
Actually need more water in my cup.
all right, we can do that between our episodes. And, well, our creative director here, Mr. Bees himself, what's our topic for this episode?
So last episode, if you saw it, and even if you didn't, we started talking about how game masters make characters versus how players make characters. And game masters are much more use focused. And we diverged very quickly onto police officers because I was talking about how I made up the character, which you guys may have seen in our earlier episodes, of Larry McCooperson, Officer Larry McCooperson on the fly. And I knew what stats he needed, which is where we diverged. And
Yep.
so I just boosted those. I said, okay, he's going to be 2D and everything because we use the D6 system. He's going to be average and everything. And then he's going to be boosted in like 4 skills. And that's all. And then I'm giving him an average strength of 3D. Um, and I did that fast. That's all I put into it. I didn't give it any more thought than that at the time during the session. And that's use-based character creation. What do I need this character to do? What do I want him to be able to do? What do I need him to be able to do? And that's how game masters make NPCs. And once you're good at it, once you practiced it for a bit, which you usually do in session, and the first time you're going to be like, and you sit there with a blank character sheet, throw some stats on it real quick, and so you remember what you wrote down. And that's it. That's what you do. Well, if you take this and apply it to character creation for a player, what it gives you a huge advantage because you actually start figuring out what you want your character to be able to do inside the game. And then you go and build your backstory. So, like I said, I've been playing City of Heroes. It just got its license back from NCSoft, so now City of Heroes Homecoming is fully licensed. So you can go play it for free. It's a great game. And they're not paying us or anything because they don't make any money. But it is a good game. It's fun to play. And there's so much variety that I've been talking to people because I've been playing for years. I played when the game was out originally 20 years ago, so did Buse. And people ask me how to make characters because I'm okay at it. I'm not great. I'm not a master of it. I can't tell you the ideal way to make every character, but I keep giving people the same advice. Instead of going to try and make this ideal character, figure out what you want to be able to do in the group. Because there's so much variety. Just because you're playing a tank doesn't mean you have to be the most indestructible tank ever. If you're playing solo, then you just set your solo power level to the point where you can do stuff, where you're not facing the biggest, baddest enemies in the game all the time. You don't always have to do those missions. That's not how solo play works. If you're playing in a group, there's going to be people there to buff you and heal you. So you don't have to be this indestructible rock, which is the character I play. You also can be the indestructible rock if you want to. What are you looking? But then I give up a lot of attack force, not only power, but also the number of attacks I can do is lowered because of the choices I made. But I'm very happy with my character because it plays exactly the way I want it to play. Now that's true in video games, but it's also true when you're sitting at the table. Okay, you want to play I don't know, in D&D, you want to be a damage dealer. Okay, do you want to be a melee damage dealer in like up close and personal, or do you want to fight from range? If you want to fight from range, do you want to fight with spells or with your bow and arrow or your gun? Because it's not only D&D, it's also tabletop RPGs encompass anything you can imagine, you can create a system for, or you can use an existing system to play out that storyline you imagined. So where's your focus? In the Star Wars D6 RPG, it was originally a Star Wars RPG. We've rebuilt it a number of times to cover different scenarios, but in Star Wars, I would often tell people to make an all-around character for your first character so you can experience. And that's the other thing is you want to experience different things, but and find out what you actually like doing. But in Star Wars, it's specifically just like watching the original three movies or the Lucas six. There's times when the characters need to be great at combat on the ground and great at combat in a vehicle. And those are two different skill sets. So you might highly focus on one or highly focus on the other and lose ability in the like you might be great at ship combat and lousy at ground combat, or you might be great at ground combat and lousy at ship combat, or you could be average in everything. Game systems like this tend to average out that way. So yeah, that's my main point. Not only that, in tabletop RPGs, you might focus completely on role playing, especially with a D6 system, but you can even do it in 5e D&D. Your focus might be entirely on your role-playing skills so that you can make all the checks in a conversation to be a great persuader. You might talk your way out of all your situations, which is very possible to do. We have got a couple of characters in the game I'm running now that can talk their way out of situations quite well. Crenshaw, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Crenshaw talks his way out of most of his problems. And if when he can't do that, he gives them a psychic blast.
Whereas my character is not as good as Crenshaw, but fairly decent. I just give him a blast with my fist.
A fistic blast. This sounds
Exactly.
awful. Anyway, you have anything to add up to this point? You have anything to add up to this point, Buse? Or
So no, not really. But no,
all
but
right.
no, but all joking aside, yeah. When it comes Bees is right. Like especially if you're your first time playing, like even if you're playing something like D&D, which I haven't looked at the fifth edition system, I kind of feel like I should.
Probably should at
If we
some point. It's really a superhero game at this point. I mean,
if we
fantasy,
if we
but it's
were
a superhero game.
if we were monetized and making money, I'd use it as a tax write-off, but we're not. So, uh, but when it
If
comes to
D&D
at
wants to
least
sponsor us, we'll have to think about that.
if we if I was playing on a when I'm playing on a D6 system, even a lot of my regular characters tend to be fairly middle of the road. Most of my attributes, and then maybe have one attribute which is professional level, and everything else being above average with one average. Because you can't be below average in D6 as a regular character, uh,
Well, not as a human.
not as a human. Uh, but the nice thing about that is some of those characters, especially when you have people leave games, they come in clutch because you might not normally be the tank of the group, but if someone can't make it or moves away, oh, look, well, you
Yeah.
have the next highest. You might not be the scout or the rogue of the group, but hey, you have the next highest. As a GM, when I have a character who participates with the with the group, which I typically name after a good friend of mine, uh, at least in Star Wars, you know who I mean.
I know nothing. I know nothing. I see nothing.
But yeah, I typically will have them be 3D and everything, which is above average, but it's the base level, and then I just build off of there because no matter what, he is capable of having a chance at succeeding most most normal average rolls. He's not below average in anything, or he's not at average in anything. He's got a little bit of knowledge and everything, so it makes it easier to just build the character up in that particular thing, which I did in one of my games where I ended up playing. Okay, I got some time to ramble a little bit. So, long story short, a friend I played a game with a friend of ours, and Bees was in this game as well briefly. He, lived far away, so he wasn't a regular member, but he would join us occasionally.
Hmm.
And we actually, for a while, we started swapping out who was running the game. So we would have our player character leave the group for a while that person actually GM'd. And the character I brought in, middle of the road. And I ended up having a weird, wide selection of skills that I improved over time because I filled in a bit for everybody because I was the third best pilot, but we needed a pilot and co pilot. So when
Hmm.
the top pilot went, I moved in. I was ended up being the third best fighter for the same reason. Everything I was like second or third best in, and I could take a hit, and it just worked. It actually worked out well to the point that sometimes they asked if I could keep the character in while I was GMing, which I didn't do. But he was also he also wasn't belligerent like a lot of my characters were. He was actually somewhat likable, uh,
That
and
helps.
yeah, well, he was. Funny thing was, I was playing like a teenager. He was like 16 or 18 or whatever, depending upon when, and it was just a fun time. I just needed something I could throw together real quick, and I'm like, well, I've used this character in some stories I've written before, so why don't I just throw him in there and boop,
He
and that
was
was it.
17 and he was far from in between. It was gaming time in northern Michigan. Wait, they're not in Michigan.
Northern New England.
There you go.
But yeah, so I highly actually recommend it because even in D&D, to some degree, I don't
Hmm.
know about the new system, but even with the old third edition, 3.5 edition, you could somewhat do that. It was called being a bard or a rogue. You could be because especially with a bard, they could wear plate armor. They could, or at least chain armor. Um, they had a decent amount of skills, and they had some magical abilities. You choose some, like, with their songs, you choose something semi-offensive and something more defensive or buff wise or whatever, just as you're kind of going up and collecting your songs and abilities, and they're buffers on their own. It worked fine as a middle of the road character, and they could fill in. And when it comes to, speaking of bards, if we talk about, like, if we're talking about MMOs like EverQuest, at least at low levels, because EverQuest, every character is specialized once you get up to high levels because they're specifically meant for it. But when you're talking about pre-level 20, there was a your group could be made up of your group didn't have to be ideal to do stuff unless you were running actual, like, dungeons, and most of the time even with those, as long as you were just taking care of the trash and even some of the named, you were fine. And just you could fill in just depending upon what you did. I've tanked as a bard many times in lower level EQ.
Got
I
all
have
these memories of Crushbone coming back to me now.
I have
It's
tanked
all
as a
coming
rogue.
back. It's all
That was
coming
not
back to me
fun,
now.
but I have done it. It just, it's just
Yeah,
like
I've tanked as a
character.
rogue in it. EQ.
I've done it. I had a really good couple of healers. It helps to have a
So,
druid, two clerics.
so the point I want to make here is you start with, and let's try and make it before we run out of our self-imposed time limit here. You start with what you actually want to do with your character, and then you work backwards. So if you're great at, I don't know, let's go back to Star Wars D6. If you're great at, you know, blasters or piloting or driving or whatever, you once you have your stats all set out and what you want your character to be able to do, then you go backwards and figure out what would my character have had to go through in life. Where do they pick up these skills? Why are they good at that? If you're a doctor, how did you become a doctor? If you're an engineer, how did you become an engineer? If you're a Jedi, how did you become a Jedi? How did you become a bounty hunter? Where did you pick up your skills with your blaster? Maybe you're a bounty hunter who's not great with blasters, but you're great with tracking people and setting up traps that they would fall into. Where did you get these skills? And as you answer the questions of how you got these skills, now you've got a complete character story, or a very complete, not a maybe not 100% complete. Maybe you haven't added in. Maybe your GM will come back and be like, "Look, I need some plot hooks here. I need some characters that can give you plot hooks. So you need to add more stuff in." But or if you don't, I will, which is something I've said repeatedly over the years. Um, But if you build your character that way, then you're always going to have something you can do in your group. And group makeup matters a lot less in RPG and tabletop RPGs than it does in MMO RPGs. Um, so yeah, give it a shot. Next time you're making a new character, instead of starting from some cool idea you have, start with what you want to be able to do and then work backwards. It works great in character creation for stories as well. Um, in one fantasy story I was writing, I needed a character who was a. Um, okay, forget that part. I'm going to tell you about the two main characters because it can go all sorts of places, and we're at 15 minutes, so I'll do this quick. I decided I was going to make these two twins that were min-maxed, two elven twins. One was a warrior, one is a magic user, and they're completely min-maxed to be as good as you could possibly start inside of the D6 role-playing system I came up with, as good as they could possibly be, which means they're awful at a lot of other things. And I had to go through and figure out story-wise what I wanted them to be average at and okay at, and what I was willing to let them be actually awful at. And in doing that, I came up with these two characters and then explaining I started with the stats. I explained how they got those stats, and that's how I got my two starting characters for the story. And I made them brothers. That ties them together, and that leads into a novel I've completely plotted out and haven't finished writing, but it's it worked out that way that I ended up with these two characters that played off each other incredibly well. And yeah, starting with their stats, what did I want them to be able to do in the party? And that led to these two guys, Jack and John, who are just polar opposites, but would kill for each other, would die for each other, because they're family and they actually love each other the way family is supposed to. Okay, are we good for 17:24 right now?
Sounds good. All right. Well, I will just say in general, we're happy to have you along. Hope you'll
Yep.
join us for our next partial episode, and we'll see you, truckers.